What if I told you that someone tried to destroy your name, but ended up revealing your true greatness? No, you're not here by chance. If this video appeared to you, it's because there's something in your spirit that needed to hear this truth. And it starts now. Before we continue this real and powerful story of change, I have an invitation for you. Leave your like now if you have ever felt misunderstood or judged into silence. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss videos that speak to your soul. And if something here touches you, comments on number 22, this number will be our connection signal between you, this message, and the greater purpose behind it. What you're about to hear now isn't just a story, it's a mirror, it's a revelation, it's confirmation that silence also has a voice, and sometimes it's the most powerful of all. So stay until the end, because this story begins with an attempt at destruction and ends with a rebirth that no one expected. They wanted to find dirt, something, anything, that could be used as ammunition to destroy what you had so zealously built. But what began as a sabotage mission turned into a pilgrimage for evidence that simply didn't exist. With every door they knocked, every person they questioned, the answer was always the same: respect, integrity, constancy. There was no trace of scandal, no trace of manipulation. Instead of finding grounds for condemnation, what emerged was a silent chorus of admiration, spontaneous, genuine, and disconcerting for those expecting ruin. The scenario changed quickly. The investigator, who was supposed to dig deep and unearth whatever was hidden, returned with coherent stories from someone who was the same person on camera as he was off. They expected a mask to slip, but found only authenticity. That operation, disguised as concern, revealed an uncomfortable truth to those behind the scenes. The reputation they intended to tarnish had already been armored with years of impeccable conduct. And that's where the plan falls apart. Because when the truth emerges organically, no false narrative can resist it. The attempted smear turned into a documentary of unscripted praise. What was supposed to be the beginning of the fall turned out to be the peak of the rise. The research that was supposed to expose flaws ended up exposing the greatness of someone who never needed to hide. And for those who engineered the collapse, the bitter taste of seeing the trap become an altar remained. They didn't want justice, they wanted emotional revenge. They weren't seeking the truth but confirmation of the poison they'd been secretly harboring. The defendant's name had been put on the table, the trial had already been held behind the scenes, and all that was missing was one piece of evidence: a flaw, a stain, a mistake. But the plan failed miserably, because where they expected to find weakness, they found firmness. Where they sought inconsistency, they found a straight line of impeccable conduct. There were no dirty backroom dealings, no compromising conversations. Interpersonal relationships told a completely different story than the one the accusers expected to hear. Friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances reported a history of respect and focus. The reputation, built in silence, had become an impenetrable fortress. What's more, it had shielded itself against the kind of attack that relies on doubt, hesitation, and the absence of exculpatory evidence. But in this case, the evidence didn't need to be fabricated. It was already there, vivid and witnessed. Thus, what was supposed to be a scandal became a monument. Not because someone came to his defense with fiery speeches, but because past actions began to speak louder than any planned slander. His reputation, far from being merely clean, proved to be solid as stone, honed by time and truth. For those expecting blood, only the shame of having underestimated the power of silent integrity remained. At first, the silence felt strange. A response, a statement, perhaps even a counterattack was expected. But nothing came. No attempt to respond, no effort to explain, just silence. And this silence, instead of being interpreted as weakness, began to reverberate in a way the accusers never imagined. It gained shape, strength, and volume, as if it said more than any words ever could. Because deep down, those who are at peace don't need to justify themselves, while others talked too much, creating theories, whispering rumors, and trying to paint false pictures. The silence became unbearable. It was like a mirror reflecting not only the absence of guilt, but the certainty of those with a clear conscience. Those who accused expected chaos, but what they received was stability, and this stability began to undermine their certainties. Silence, previously despised, began to become the judge of history. And the verdict was formed slowly but with surgical precision. In the end, it became clear that the absence of defense was, in fact, the greatest defense of all, because those who shout are sometimes trying to cover what they cannot hide, but those who remain silent allow the truth to find its own way. And that's exactly what happened. The silence became a sentence. And the sentence was clear: innocence, dignity, righteousness, without having to say a single word. The strategy was simple: create a smokescreen, raise suspicions, sow doubts. It was a hunt, but not for justice, for darkness. They wanted to prove that behind the calm facade lay a corrupt, false being, worthy of exposure. But as the investigation progressed, an unexpected phenomenon began to occur. The more they sought darkness, the more they encountered light. With each step, more clarity. With each testimony, more brilliance. It wasn't just that plans went awry. It was that everything began to change. The questions asked with the intention of finding dirt revealed stories of kindness, firm stance, and ethical choices. And what was once an operation to expose became a parade of spontaneous testimonies. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was a history of coherence. There was no holiness, but there was true humanity, the kind that sustains itself even when hidden from view. This light was uncomfortable. Because the illuminated truth is uncomfortable for those who live in the shadows, they realized too late that they weren't just investigating someone else, they were being confronted with their own intentions. They sought out others' flaws to hide their own, and ended up illuminated by a reflection they hadn't expected. What should have been the unveiling of an imposter became the revelation of a character that shines even in silence. They were counting on the neutrality of the wrong people. They imagined that old colleagues, distant ex-friends, even acquaintances who had barely crossed paths, could be useful sources of doubt. After all, a small criticism, a distorted memory, a sentence taken out of context would suffice. But what no one expected was that even these people, those they had no affection for or closeness to, couldn't lie. That's when everything fell apart. When even the indifferent were saying, "He was always respectful. He never got into trouble, and I never saw anything wrong," the narrative began to crumble. Because there's no way to force a scandal when even the silent are righteous. The absence of resentment in the testimonies of those distant is worth more than 1,000 emotional defenses from those close to him. And the truth emerged precisely from these unexpected places, from the silent colleague, the discreet neighbor, the former co-worker who hadn't forgotten the integrity he once lived. This, more than anything, was the fatal blow to those who desired destruction. Because when even the indifferent can't find dirt, it's a sign that the field is truly clean. The coherence lived day after day, without an audience, without applause, built an image so solid that not even the silence of those far away could be used against it. The truth is, sometimes the greatest shield isn't allies. It's the neutrals who refuse to lie. The intention was clear from the start. It wasn't an investigation, it was an ambush. An operation disguised as concern, when in reality it was a trap to silently destroy reputations. They wanted to assassinate character, silence influence, and dismantle piece by piece the image so many respected. But what they didn't know is that by initiating this movement, they opened an invisible tribunal, a judgment greater than any backroom conversation, a spiritual judgment, because when the truth is on your side, there's no need to defend yourself. It rises on its own, in the form of greater justice. Every detail was recorded. Every word spoken by those who knew him became evidence. Not evidence gathered through manipulation, but testimony that came naturally. There was no pressure, no coordinated defense. It was as if the universe had already been prepared for this moment, as if every act of respect past was now an indisputable piece of evidence. And those who engineered the destruction realized too late that they had initiated something beyond their control. An exposure, yes, but of their own rot. The heavenly court doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with robes or gavel. It emerges when human plans attempt to interfere with divine destinies. And in this trial, the witnesses were real, the testimonies were spontaneous, and the verdict was resounding. Absolute innocence. But more than that, cover-up. Not only was it clear that there was no guilt, it was evident that there was purpose. What was supposed to be an end became rebirth. What was supposed to be ruin became redemption. And the accusers, speechless, watched what can only be called sacred justice. In their blind desire to expose flaws, they overlooked a cruel detail about truth. It is a mirror, and those who seek to reflect others without facing themselves end up confronted with their own image. That's exactly what happened. What should have been a process to bring their mistakes to light became an intimate and disturbing revelation about who their accusers really were. With each step of the investigation, with each testimony that contradicted their expectations, the truth returned, like a moral boomerang to the one who cast the first stone. Frustration was inevitable, because it wasn't just that the target was clean, it was that, in comparison, everything they had hidden was now highlighted. They expected a fall, but instead saw a rise. They expected blemishes, but instead saw a glow that was hard to dim. And worse, this glow illuminated their own shadows. It was no longer a question about the other, but about themselves. It was as if the attempt to unmask someone had pulled back the curtain on their own unresolved flaws, their emotional addictions, their flawed choices. This kind of confrontation is unforgettable. It leaves a mark, not on the skin, but on the soul. Because the mirror of truth doesn't distort, it reveals. And there was the reflection, not of the accused victim, but of the tormentors deluded by arrogance. They tried to judge, but were judged themselves. They tried to hide their intentions under layers of rumors, but were exposed by a series of compliments they didn't know how to refute. The dirt they so desperately sought wasn't on others, it was on themselves. And now, even if they want to run away, they've seen something they can never forget. For a long time, their lifestyle was underestimated, too discreet, too quiet, without controversy, without scandal, without theatrical reactions. To those who thrive on chaos, their calm seemed like a flaw. To those who survive on drama, their disciplined routine was boring. But now that they needed to find something scandalous, something compromising, they realized the incalculable value of this stability. Their life, which had previously been invisible to eyes seeking confusion, became unbreakable in the face of attempts to demoralize them. There were no compromised digital traces. There were no screenshots of questionable conversations, no shady stories behind the scenes of social media. There was routine, there was silence, there was a coherence that never wavered. And this, more than any scandal, was what drove his accusers mad. They couldn't understand how someone who didn't show off, didn't mingle, and didn't seek out the stage could still be respected. And they discovered, the hard way, that respect isn't built with noise but with consistency. The boredom of their lives became a nightmare because it offered no openings. And when there are no holes, the castle doesn't crumble. They wanted ruins but found a solid structure. They wanted chaos but found peace. And this peace was provocative. It screamed an uncomfortable truth. Living in silence and with purpose is more powerful than any invented narrative. What they considered irrelevant is now what keeps them from destroying you. Because your routine without spectacle was, in the end, the most terrifying spectacle for those who live a lie. It's easy to fall into the trap of reaction. When someone drags their name, when intentions are misrepresented, the first temptation is to scream. It's the impulse to explain yourself, to seek immediate justice with sharp words. But you didn't choose that path. You understood that there's a greater power in not responding. A power that doesn't impose itself, but manifests itself in the stability of behavior. And that power began to weigh heavily, because while they waited for your nervous breakdown, they received your firm indifference. Time was your ally. While distorted narratives were spread, your past remained unshaken. No lie withstood the facts, and what most surprised those expecting a spectacle was that you didn't offer one. You didn't try to justify yourself. You didn't play along. You didn't give the stage to chaos. Your choice to remain silent was a statement more powerful than any speech. Those with a clean record don't need defending themselves. Their own trajectory does it for them, and that kind of strength is rare. Because it requires self-control, it requires a solid identity. It requires an inner peace that can't be bought. While they sought to provoke, you stood your ground. While the tension grew, you were rock solid. And that, in the end, ruined their plans. Because you can't defeat someone who has already understood they don't need to prove anything. Those who know what they are allow time to speak. And time spoke, loudly, clearly, and in your favor. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the entire situation was the unanimous recognition of his integrity. not just by close friends or family, but by people who barely knew him, people who had crossed his path only once, or who observed him from afar. Yet, when asked, these people had the same answer. I've never seen him involved in any trouble. He's always been polite. He inspires trust. And therein lies the secret. His truth was so evident that it transcended bonds. It was a vibration, a moral signature that cannot be hidden. This perception, coming from outsiders, was the final blow to the attempted smear, because it can't be said that everyone was defending out of affinity. Those who had nothing to gain, no reason to take sides, were still unanimous. And this is no coincidence. It's the result of a life lived consistently, even when no one is looking. It wasn't a social act, it was character. And character, when authentic, reveals itself even in small gestures. These silent testimonies showed that the influence of someone with integrity goes beyond words. It's in the exchange of glances, the brief interactions, the moments when one is observed without knowing it. A true reputation doesn't need to be built, it emanates. And that's exactly what shielded you, a legacy of actions that doesn't need captions. Your story wasn't being told, it was being felt. For a long time your distance was misinterpreted. They said you were cold, arrogant and too withdrawn. The world, accustomed to people who blend into any circle and adapt to any environment, didn't know how to deal with someone who chose silence, who preferred solitude to forced coexistence. But what few understood and now must swallow is that this choice was never born of fear or weakness. It was tactical. It was discernment. It was the wisdom of knowing that not every presence is good, and that not every connection is worth the cost. This solitude was the wall that kept you out of the intrigues. While others became entangled in alliances of convenience and cliques based on gossip, you built a safe space where your peace was a priority. Not participating in certain circles kept you from being associated with the dirt that circulated within them. And this, at the moment of truth, gave you a huge advantage. There were no records, involvements, or even mentions connecting you to the confusion created. You were a figure apart, untouchable. And the most surprising thing was how, instead of being a weakness, this posture became your armor. They tried to find traces, they wanted to link your name to some shadow, but your absence from the toxic environments was the strongest proof that you were, from the beginning, protected. The loneliness they mocked became armor. The distance they criticized became strategy. And now they faced the fact that, while they were busy being sociable and manipulative, you were being genuine. And that saved you. They trusted in the power of gossip. They believed that by spreading small doses of poison here and there, they could create a distorted image strong enough to stick. They were certain that the comments between the lines, the sarcastic smiles, the malicious glances, would create a wave of suspicion no one could ignore. But what they found was something completely unexpected. The very people who, in theory, could remain silent or even contribute to these lies, were saying the exact opposite, and behind their backs. Unprompted, unmanipulated, people began spontaneously commenting on his conduct. He's always been a decent person. He's never been involved in controversy. He's consistent in what he says and does. Comments that might have gone unnoticed in other contexts now became concrete blocks, cementing his reputation. These weren't rehearsed defenses. They were real insights, the fruit of close contact, even if distant. And this had a profound impact. It demonstrated that his positive image wasn't the result of personal marketing, but of lived experience. The greatest irony of all is that gossip itself, the weapon they prepared to hurt you, has become a shield. Because instead of negative stories, what echoed was silent admiration. Backbiting has been reversed. It's gone from being a tool of defamation to a tool of proof. And in the end, the words whispered away from you were the ones that helped protect you the most. A solid reputation is one that holds up even when you're not in the room, and yours has held up with surprising strength. Every story needs an antagonist, and they chose you for that role. Based on distorted interpretations, unresolved resentments, and disguised envy, they began to construct a script where you were the problem. Your every silence was treated as arrogance. Every choice to walk away was interpreted as superiority. They turned you into the villain of their own narrative. But what they forgot is that real life doesn't follow false scripts. It creates authentic twists. The big plot twist happened when the investigation went beyond the surface. When people began to speak of you with genuine admiration, and when real stories began to contradict every line of the fake script, the one who was supposed to be the manipulator, the untrustworthy, was portrayed as upright, consistent, and respectful. Reactions changed. The gossip's internal audiences began to realize something wasn't right. The structure collapsed, not with scandal but with indisputable truths that emerged like calm, devastating waves. In the end, you became the character they couldn't control, the kind of figure who defies the script, who upends expectations, who surprises with her authenticity. And that's what weakened them most, realizing that despite every effort to manipulate the narrative, reality cast you in the protagonist role, not out of vanity, but out of deservedness. You didn't need to change the plot. You simply lived with such truth that you became the unexpected ending to their story. They were so focused on observing you, trying to find flaws in your steps, that they forgot a crucial detail. Those who point too much out begin to raise suspicions about themselves, and that's exactly what happened. By insisting on probing your story, they began to raise questions about their own intentions. Why so much interest? Why so much effort? Why the obsession with proving something no one saw? The truth is, their excessive focus ended up illuminating what should have remained in the shadows, and in this case, what emerged was disturbing. People began to notice the patterns, the same voices, the same gestures, the same looks filled with resentment. The narrative that was supposed to bring you down began to seem unsustainable, because the truth carries its own weight, and lies, no matter how well told, can't hold up to coherence. With each new attempt to discredit you, the credibility of the accuser was eroded. They opened the door to a scrutiny they never imagined would fall upon you. And so it was that the light that was supposed to expose you ended up revealing the cracks on the other side. The desire to diminish you revealed the smallness of those who attempted it. And without realizing it, they revealed not only what they feel, but who they truly are. The investigation that was launched to reveal flaws became a collective mirror, and those who so desperately wanted to see your downfall were forced to face their own abyss. The final verdict? You emerged unscathed and they exposed. There's a huge difference between fame and legacy. Fame is bought, manipulated, manufactured with strategies and platforms. But legacy is built, silently, day after day, in small choices, in gestures no one sees, in the consistency that repeats itself. You never needed to shout who you were. You never needed to convince anyone with forced words or fabricated appearances. Your life was the argument. Your journey was the narrative. And the moment they tried to tear down who you are, what was built proved unshakable. The evidence didn't come from files. It came from memories, from testimonies, from impressions left behind by your past. It came from the eyes that saw you act with integrity when no one was looking, from the ears that never heard your name associated with trouble. It came from the small details, how you treated people, how you handled silence, how you avoided foul play even when provoked. All of this built a history that no one can erase, because it wasn't created all at once, it was lived. And that is the true triumph. You didn't win with arguments, nor with public exposure. You won with consistency, with firmness, with truth. The legacy that seemed small, discreet, dull, now stands like an invisible monument before everyone. And those who tried to destroy it realized they were facing something that cannot be broken, because it was built on the foundation of everything that is real. In the end, it wasn't the volume that spoke for you, it was the living proof, and no one can dispute that.